Every time Batman almost killed someone, Batman lore. Welcome, fellow wanderer of Gotham's moral borderlands, to a long and unhurried accounting of something more uncomfortable than Batman's victories and more honest than his villain's crimes. The moments when the line he had drawn between himself and the thing he was fighting came closest to dissolving entirely. Not the rule itself, which is well documented, but the specific moments when it was most severely tested. The specific combinations of specific circumstances and specific people and specific choices that produced the specific configurations of pressure under which the commitment not to kill came nearest to being abandoned. Let your breathing slow. What follows is offered not as celebration or condemnation, but as honest witness to what those moments actually were and what their survival reveals about the person who survived them. Section 2. The rule and its origins. Why the line was drawn. Before any individual moment of near violation can be properly understood, before the specific circumstances and the specific people and the specific weights of the specific choices can be engaged with the honesty they deserve, the rule itself needs to be established, not in the abstract summary form in which it is most often described, but in the specific character of what it actually was and where it actually came from, and what psychological work it was actually doing in the specific life of the Regav, specific person who made it. The one rule is the most famous constraint in the history of American popular mythology about heroes. It is also, precisely because of that fame, the most consistently misunderstood, reduced in most popular accounts to the simple proposition that Batman does not kill, a prohibition stated in 3 words that communicates the rule's existence without communicating anything essential about the rule's character, its origins, its costs, or the specific relationship between the specific person maintaining it and the specific commitment being maintained. The night the rule was born was not the night Bruce Wayne decided not to kill. It was the night Bruce Wayne watched killing happen, watched the specific act of a specific person with a specific weapon making a specific decision about who deserved to continue existing, in the specific setting of a Gotham alley, in the specific context of a city that had failed to protect 2 specific people who had done nothing to deserve the failure of its protection. The rule that emerged from this specific experience was not the rule of a person who had decided that killing was wrong in some abstract philosophical sense and had committed to living according to the conclusion of an argument. It was the rule of a person who had watched a specific killing at the specific age when the most foundational questions about the world are still being formed, and who had organized the entire subsequent development of his life around the specific project of becoming something that could address the specific horror the specific killing had revealed, and who had recognized, somewhere in the long years of training and formation that followed the specific night, that the specific thing he was becoming needed a specific line that it would not cross if it was to remain the specific thing it needed to be, rather than becoming the specific thing it was most capable of becoming. The paradox at the foundation of Bruce Wayne's formation was not subtle and not avoidable. The child who had watched his parents killed by a man with a gun grew into an adult who studied the most effective methods available for inflicting physical damage on other human beings. He learned to break bones and to apply specific pressures to specific nerve clusters that produced specific responses in the people on whom the pressures were applied. He learned to move through darkness in ways that produced specific psychological effects in the people observing the movement, or rather, failing to observe it until the specific moment he chose to make the observation available. He assembled a specific arsenal of specific tools designed for the specific purpose of disabling and incapacitating and terrifying specific people in specific situations. He trained his body to the specific peak of what the human body could achieve through sustained, systematic application of the specific disciplines he identified as most relevant to the specific work he was preparing to do. He became, through this specific formation applied across this specific duration, perhaps the most genuinely dangerous individual human being in the specific geography of the post-war American city. The rule resolved the paradox not by eliminating it, but by drawing a specific line within it, a line that allowed the specific capabilities to be deployed without crossing into the specific act that the capabilities were most completely prepared to accomplish if the specific commitment not to accomplish it were relaxed. The rule was the specific prohibition against the final irreversibility, not against violence, which the project used continuously and systematically, not against fear, which the project deployed as its most fundamental instrument, not against harm, which the project inflicted regularly in the specific forms that the specific work required. The rule was against the specific act that converted a living person into a dead one, that took the specific future of a specific human being, with all its specific possibilities, including the specific possibility of the justice that the project was organized around achieving, and permanently and irreversibly closed it. The specific moral philosophy underlying this specific prohibition was not a simple one, and the simplifications that most accounts of it employ do a specific disservice to the specific character of the commitment. Batman's rule was not organized around the proposition that killing was always wrong in some universal and absolute sense that admitted no exceptions and no arguments. It was organized around a more specific and more personal set of propositions whose specific character reflected the specific person making the commitment and the specific project. The commitment was organized around sustaining. The first proposition was that the specific act of killing was an assumption of a specific authority over another person's existence, that the specific formation of the Batman project did not confer, not because authority over another person's existence could never be legitimately assumed, but because the specific authority the project claimed, which was the authority to pursue justice in the specific absence of adequate institutional justice, did not extend to the specific finality of death in the specific way. It extended to the specific uses of force and fear and tactical superiority that the project deployed continuously. The second proposition was more personal and more psychologically precise. It was the proposition that the specific person who would kill, who would cross the specific line and add the specific act of killing to the specific arsenal of methods already deployed, would not be the same specific person who had organized his existence around the specific project that the rule was protecting. The rule was the specific mechanism through which Bruce Wayne maintained the specific distinction between Batman and the criminals. Batman was fighting the specific line, whose maintenance was simultaneously the maintenance of the project's moral integrity and the maintenance of the specific self that the project expressed. The Joker understood this more completely than any other person in the Gotham landscape understood it, and the understanding organized the Joker's entire relationship to the rule. The understanding that breaking the rule would not simply add a specific act to Batman's record, but would collapse the specific distinction on which Batman's entire self-understanding rested, and that the most complete victory available over Batman was therefore not physical defeat, but the specific dissolution of the specific distinction, that the specific rule was the specific expression of this specific vulnerability. The fact that the rule was not simply a constraint on behavior, but the foundational architecture of a specific identity, was what made the near violations genuinely significant rather than simply interesting. When the rule was tested, it was not simply Batman's behavioral tendency toward non-lethal methods that was being tested. It was the specific psychological structure through which Bruce Wayne understood himself as something other than what his capabilities made him capable of being. The near violations were therefore always simultaneously near violations of the rule and near collapses of the specific self that the rule was organized around sustaining, and the specific costs they imposed were not simply the costs of maintaining a behavioral constraint, but the costs of maintaining a specific form of identity against the specific forms of pressure that the specific world of the project generated with specific regularity. The rule's relationship to justice was among the most persistently complicated dimensions of its character, and the complication was not one that the rule resolved, was one that the rule lived within, that the person maintaining the rule lived within, that the entire project of the Batman lived within, without the specific resolution that the most comfortable accounts of it would prefer to provide. Gotham's criminal justice system was compromised in ways that were specific and documented, and not occasional but structural. The corruption of the police, the corruption of the courts, the specific revolving door between the institutional management of Gotham's most dangerous criminals and the specific criminal landscape those criminals continued to populate after each specific institutional failure to manage them adequately. The Joker's repeated returns from institutional custody were the most publicly legible single piece of evidence for this specific structural inadequacy, the specific demonstration, repeated across the specific duration of the Joker's documented career, that the institutional alternatives to killing, that the rule was partly organized around preserving, were alternatives that the institution was specifically and comprehensively failing to make adequate. The specific moral weight of this demonstration, pressed continuously on the rule from the outside, was the specific form of the most recurrent argument against the rule's maintenance, the argument that calculated specific lives lost to the Joker's continued existence against the specific life that would be lost if Batman's capability were applied to the elimination of the threat, and found the calculation unfavorable to the rule in terms that the rule's defenders could not easily address by pointing to the institutional alternatives as adequate responses. The rule's defenders, which meant, principally, Batman himself, in the specific internal deliberations that the near violations made necessary, could not point to the institution as an adequate response, because the institution was demonstrably not an adequate response, and pointing to it as though it were would have been the specific dishonesty, that the specific commitment to not killing could not survive being organized around. What Batman pointed to instead was something more personal and less susceptible to the specific forms of refutation that the institutional argument was most vulnerable to. He pointed to the specific character of the person he would be if the rule were abandoned to the specific person who killed, even in the service of genuinely justified purposes, and the specific relationship between that specific act and the specific subsequent capacity to continue the specific project that the act had been performed in service of. The argument was not simply that killing was wrong. It was that this specific person, killing, would be the specific end of the specific thing that gave the killing the specific justification it was being performed in the name of that. The specific integrity of the commitment was a specific precondition of the specific capability it was protecting, and that a Batman who had killed was not simply Batman who had done one additional thing, but something categorically different from Batman, something whose specific relationship to the specific project was categorically different from the specific relationship the commitment defined and maintained. This argument was not invulnerable to the specific pressures of the specific near violations. The near violations were the specific evidence of how much it cost, how much of the specific person making the specific argument, the specific maintenance of the specific commitment required to be paid as the price of maintaining it. They were the specific evidence that the argument was not a comfortable resting place, but a specific, ongoing act of will, renewed in each specific moment of near violation by the specific choice to find the rule sufficient rather than the specific capability more immediately available, and the full accounting of those specific moments of renewal across the specific duration and the specific severity of the specific near violations the project produced was the most complete available evidence of what the rule actually was and what the specific person maintaining it was actually made of. Section 3. The early career, when the rule was still being forged. The rule did not arrive fully formed. This is the specific thing about it that the most comfortable accounts of Batman's early career most consistently minimize. Because the minimization allows the rule to appear as the expression of a fully developed and fully tested commitment that the person making it had arrived at through the specific process of mature moral reasoning and had implemented from the beginning of the project with the specific consistency of someone who had worked through all the relevant considerations in advance and had arrived at a position sufficiently grounded to withstand the specific pressures that the project would generate. This account is not accurate. The rule arrived gradually, through the specific experience of finding its limits in the specific situations that the early career produced the specific discovery, repeated across the specific duration of the formation period, of where the person making the commitment actually stood in relation to the limits of the commitment, when the limits were encountered not as abstract possibilities, but as specific, concrete situations in which the capability was present, and the commitment was the only thing standing between the capability and its application. The training had produced someone who could kill. This specific fact deserves specific acknowledgement because it is the specific fact that the rule's existence was organized around the rule was not the constraint of someone whose capabilities were insufficient to the acts rule was prohibiting, was not the behavioral expression of someone who could not kill, and therefore organized a moral framework around the impossibility as though it were a principled choice. The person who emerged from the years of study under the various masters of the various disciplines that the formation had assembled had been taught, the specific techniques had been shown, the specific ways that the specific application of specific pressures to specific anatomical locations produced specific permanent results in the specific persons to whom the pressures were applied, had been trained in the specific methods that made the difference between leaving an opponent incapacitated and leaving an opponent dead a matter of the specific decision made at the specific moment of the specific application of the compounding dollars. Specific capability. The training had not simply taught the techniques in the abstract sense of theoretical knowledge. It had embedded them in the specific physical and psychological formation of a person who had been training for years with sufficient seriousness and sufficient consistency to make the techniques genuinely available in the specific moments. When the specific situations that would require their use or their restraint were actually present, the choice not to use them had been made before the specific situations that would test the choice had occurred. This is the specific quality of the formation period's relationship to the rule. The rule had been established in advance of the specific encounters that would reveal whether the establishment was adequate to the specific demands the encounters would make of it. And the early career was the specific period during which the adequacy or inadequacy of the advanced establishment was being discovered through the specific experiences of the specific situations themselves. The person who descended into Gotham's criminal landscape for the first time was carrying a commitment whose specific adequacy to the specific demands of the specific landscape had not yet been tested. And the early career's most significant contribution to the rule's eventual character was not the confirmation of the commitment's adequacy, but the specific process of discovering, through specific encounters, exactly what the commitment was being asked to absorb, and exactly what the person making the commitment was capable of sustaining in the specific situations in which the absorption was required. The vulnerability of the formation period was not simply the vulnerability of inexperience in the tactical sense, not simply the absence of the specific operational knowledge that only the specific encounters could provide, the knowledge of which methods worked against which threats in which configurations of specific circumstances. It was the vulnerability of a moral commitment that had been made in the specific context of a formation organized primarily around the development of capability, and that was now being deployed in the specific contexts that would reveal the specific relationship between the capability and the commitment in the specific terms of actual situations rather than abstract principles. The training had produced the capability. The training had not produced the specific wisdom about what maintaining the commitment against the specific pressure of specific situations actually required had not, because the specific wisdom could only come from the specific situations themselves, and the specific situations were what the early career was providing. The encounter with Joe Chill occupied a specific position in this early period that no other encounter could replicate, because no other encounter was organized around the specific person whose specific act had been the specific occasion for the entire project's existence. Joe Chill was not simply a criminal in the category of the criminals that Batman's project was organized around addressing. He was the specific criminal whose specific act had organized the specific night around which the specific project had been organized, the specific person who had pointed a specific gun at two specific people in a specific alley and had made a specific decision that had produced specific consequences whose full scope the person making the decision almost certainly had not anticipated. The specific weight of the encounter with Joe Chill was therefore not simply the weight of a specific threat requiring a specific response, but the weight of the founding trauma being made available in the specific form of the specific person whose specific act had produced it, available in the specific way that the founding trauma had never previously been available as a specific encounter with a specific person, rather than as a specific memory of a specific night. The specific near violation this encounter produced was not the near violation of hot rage, the kind of near violation organized around the specific overwhelming of rational deliberation by the specific emotional intensity of a specific moment. It was more complicated than that, and the complication was the specific thing about it that made it most revealing of the specific character of the commitment. The early career was in the process of forming. The specific temptation the encounter with Joe Chill presented was not primarily the temptation of retribution, though the retributive dimension was genuinely present and would have been dishonest to deny. It was the temptation of completion, the specific satisfaction of closing a specific circle that the crime alley murders had opened, and that everything subsequently constructed in the years between the opening and this encounter had been organized around the specific ending of the specific story that the specific night had begun, in the specific terms of the specific narrative whose logic the specific conclusion seemed most naturally to satisfy. The rules stood against this logic with the specific authority of a commitment that had been made before the encounter, and that the encounter was now testing against the specific weight of everything the encounter's specific emotional content could bring to bear against it. The rule stood against the logic, not because the logic was simple or weak. It was neither simple nor weak, but because the specific person who had made the commitment had made it precisely in awareness of the specific weight that the specific logic carried, had made it as the specific response to the specific temptation, rather than in ignorance of the specific temptation's existence. The commitment was made, in other words, in full understanding of what it was costing, in full awareness that the specific person toward whom the capability was most specifically oriented by the founding trauma was the specific person against whom the commitment was most specifically requiring restraint, and the early career's encounter with Joe Chill was the specific occasion on which the cost was paid in the most personally immediate available terms. What the encounter revealed about the rule was something that the abstract statement of the rule could not have revealed, something that only the specific experience of finding the rule sufficient against the specific weight of the rule specific encounter could make available. It revealed that the rule was not a comfortable resting place, but a specific active achievement, requiring the specific ongoing expenditure of the specific will that had made it, rather than simply the passive maintenance of a constraint whose maintenance required no particular effort. The rule was not simply a thing Bruce Wayne believed. It was a thing Bruce Wayne was doing continuously and specifically in each specific moment of specific encounter, renewed through the specific act of choosing it against the specific weight of whatever the specific moment was bringing to bear against it. The Joe Chill encounter was the specific first occasion on which this specific character of the rule's maintenance was made fully and personally available, and the specific form in which it was made available, not as triumph but as cost, not as the simple expression of a simple principle, but as the specific, difficult choosing of a specific difficult thing, was the specific form in which the early career most honestly revealed what the project was going to require of the person who had committed himself to it. The specific early career situations in which the gap between Batman's capability and his commitment was first made systematically visible were situations whose specific character reflected the specific landscape of early period. Gotham, the organized crime, the corrupt police, the specific human wreckage of a city whose institutional failures were not subtle or occasional, but pervasive and structural. The encounters with the specific criminals of the specific organized crime structure that organized Gotham's early period criminal landscape were encounters with people whose specific harms were real and specific and documented, whose specific continued existence produced specific ongoing harms to specific people who had no adequate protection from those harms, and whose specific vulnerability to the specific capability Batman was bringing to the encounters was genuine and available and requiring the specific active restraint of the specific commitment in order not to be exploited. The specific near violations of the early career were near violations of a specific quality that distinguished them from the later career's most significant moments, distinguished not by being less genuine or less close, but by being organized around a different, specific dimension of the commitment's challenge. The later career's most significant near violations were organized around the specific weight of the specific relationships involved: the grief for Jason Todd, the specific horror of what had been done to Barbara Gordon, the specific philosophical challenge of Ra's al Ghul's coherent argument against the rule's adequacy. The early career's near violations were organized around a simpler and, in certain respects, more honest challenge: the challenge of discovering, through the specific experience of specific encounters, what the specific rule actually cost in the specific terms of specific situations rather than abstract principles, and finding the commitment adequate to the cost without yet having the specific history of adequacy that the later career's sustained maintenance would eventually provide as its own form of evidence. The specific development of the non-lethal arsenal was not incidental to this process, but central to it was the specific, practical response to the specific recognition that the commitment required not simply the will to maintain it, but the specific methods adequate to the specific situations in which the will was being required. A commitment to not killing that was regularly requiring the specific choice between killing and being killed was a commitment whose maintenance was organized around a specific vulnerability that the development of adequate, non-lethal alternatives could address, not by eliminating the vulnerability entirely, because the specific situations Batman operated in would never be fully susceptible to the elimination of the vulnerability, but by reducing the specific frequency of the specific configurations in which the choice presented itself in its most acute and most directly forcing form. The batarangs and the grapple and the specific tactical approaches whose development the early career produced were therefore not simply operational innovations. They were the specific practical expression of the specific moral commitment, the specific ways in which the commitment was being built into the operational infrastructure, rather than simply being held as a separate principle applied after the operational decisions had already been made. What the early career most completely revealed was the specific character of the project as a project whose specific integrity required the specific ongoing integration of the specific moral commitment into the specific operational reality, not the maintenance of the commitment as an abstract principle applied after the fact to specific situations whose specific operational character was determined independently, but the development of the specific operational approach whose specific character reflected the specific commitment at every level of its construction. The early career was the specific period during which this specific integration was being accomplished, during which the specific person and the specific commitment and the specific methods were being formed into the specific, coherent whole that the later career would deploy, test, nearly break, and sustain across the specific duration of its engagement with the specific world, whose specific demands would determine whether the specific integration had been sufficiently thorough to survive the specific pressures it would generate. Section 4. The Joker's Campaign. Systematic pressure on the One Rule. The relationship between Batman and the Joker was organized, from the Joker's side of it, around a specific understanding of the rule that was more complete and more precise than any other understanding available in the Gotham landscape, more complete than the understanding of the people who supported Batman's commitment, more precise than the understanding of the people who questioned it, more analytically sophisticated than any external commentary on the rule that the available documentation records. The Joker understood the rule in the specific way that the person most completely organized around its destruction understood it in the specific terms of its most fundamental vulnerability, the specific identification of the specific thing whose dissolution would not simply change Batman's behavior, but would change what Batman was, and the specific design of the specific campaign organized around producing that dissolution through the specific application of specific pressures to the specific vulnerabilities the understanding had identified. The specific insight at the center of the Joker's understanding was not the insight that the rule could be broken, was not simply the recognition that Batman's capability was adequate to the killing the rule was prohibiting, and that sufficient provocation might overcome the commitment against the capability's application. This insight was available to anyone who thought about the rule for long enough, and many of the people in Batman's operational landscape had thought about it for long enough to have it. The Joker's insight was more specific and more devastating than this. It was the understanding that the rule was not simply a constraint on Batman's behavior, but the specific thing whose maintenance was the specific mechanism through which Bruce Wayne remained Bruce Wayne, rather than becoming what the formation had produced the capability for him to become. The rule was not simply what Batman did not do. It was the specific expression of what Batman was, the specific ongoing act of self-definition through which the specific person maintained the specific identity that the project was organized around expressing. This understanding organized everything about the Joker's campaign against the rule. The campaign was not a series of provocations designed to make Batman angry enough to kill. Anger, sufficient to overcome the rule's constraint, was not the specific goal, because the Joker understood that the rule's maintenance was not simply a matter of emotional regulation, was not simply the product of Batman's ability to manage the specific emotional states that the specific provocations were designed to produce. The rule's maintenance was something more architectural than that, something organized at the level of the specific psychological structure through which the specific identity was maintained, and the specific dissolution of the rule that the Joker's campaign was organized around producing was a dissolution at the level of that architecture, rather than simply a dissolution of the specific emotional management through which the architecture expressed itself in specific situations. The campaign was therefore organized around the systematic identification and engagement of the specific structural vulnerabilities of the specific identity, rather than simply the escalation of the specific provocations whose emotional weight might eventually overwhelm the specific emotional management the identity employed. The specific tool the campaign used most extensively was the specific tool of the impossible choice, the specific construction of situations whose specific character made every available option the option that most clearly expressed exactly what the Joker's thesis claimed was true about the world, which was that the specific moral framework Batman was organizing his existence around was inadequate to the specific reality it was being applied within. The kill one to save many scenarios that the Joker constructed across the duration of the campaign were not simply sadistic games, though the sadism was present and genuine. They were the specific philosophical arguments of the campaign made concrete in the specific form of specific situations, the specific demonstration through the specific construction of specific circumstances. That the rule whose maintenance was the specific expression of Batman's identity was simultaneously the specific mechanism of specific harm to specific people whose welfare the identity claimed to be organized around protecting. The specific weight of this specific form of the challenge was the weight of genuine moral complexity rather than simple evil, and the specific honesty required to engage with the challenge meant acknowledging the genuine complexity rather than dismissing it as the mere sophistry of a person whose philosophy could be set aside because of the moral character of the person advancing it. The Joker's argument about the costs of the rule was not invalid simply because the Joker was making it. The specific people harmed by the Joker's continued existence were specifically and genuinely harmed, and the specific calculation of those specific harms against the specific cost of ending the threat that produced them was a calculation that could not be dismissed simply by pointing to the identity of the person proposing the calculation. The rule's defense required engaging with the calculation rather than dismissing it, and the specific difficulty of the engagement, the specific intellectual and moral work required to maintain the commitment against the genuine force of the argument rather than against its mere assertion, was the specific dimension of the Joker's campaign that imposed the most sustained and the most specifically costly pressure on the rule and the person maintaining it. Barbara Gordon's shooting was the most publicly legible single expression of the specific cost the rule was extracting, and the specific near violation it produced was organized around the specific combination of personal grief and specifically assessed responsibility that the specific circumstances created in the specific person they were directed at. The Joker shot Barbara Gordon with a specific understanding of what the shooting would accomplish, not simply the harm to a specific person, but the specific demonstration to the specific person whose commitment the campaign was. Organized around breaking of the specific cost of the specific commitment in the specific terms of specific suffering inflicted on a specific person in the specific context of her specific relationship to Batman's project. The demonstration was not simply that the Joker was capable of causing this harm, that capability was not in question. The demonstration was that Batman's specific commitment was the specific condition that made the harm available to the Joker as an instrument, that the rule's maintenance was the specific thing that kept the Joker in the specific world in which the specific capability could be applied to the specific people in the specific orbit of Batman's work. The specific near violation that followed was not the hot rage of immediate reaction. The specific circumstances of the killing joke events did not produce in Batman the specific configuration of overwhelming, immediate, emotional response that the word rage is most immediately associated with. They produced something colder and more sustained, and in certain respects more frightening, the specific configuration of someone who was fully aware of what had happened, and fully aware of who was responsible, and fully aware of the specific capability in their own hands, and fully aware of the specific commitment that stood between the capability and its application, and who was conducting, in full awareness of all these specific facts simultaneously, the specific deliberation about what the specific maintenance of the specific commitment was worth in the specific terms of the specific harm to the specific person that the specific commitment was the specific condition of. The deliberation was not long in the sense of being extended across days of reflective consideration. It was long in the sense of being fully present to the specific weight of each specific element, the capability, the harm, the responsible party, the commitment and finding the commitment, sufficient against the weight of all of them, but finding it sufficient through a process that was its own specific form of damage, a form whose specific marks were visible in the specific quality of the relationship between Batman and the Joker in every subsequent encounter. Jason Todd's death constituted a different and, in certain respects, more specifically devastating form of the same basic structure. The difference was the addition of the specific dimension of personal failure to the grief, the specific awareness that the specific person who had been specifically and systematically destroyed was a person who had been specifically in Batman's care, whose specific vulnerability to the specific attack had been created partly by the specific nature of the relationship with Batman, and whose specific destruction was therefore not simply harm to a person in Batman's orbit, but harm to a person whose specific relationship to Batman was itself the specific instrument that the Joker had used to access and to exploit. The specific vulnerability, the guilt this produced, was not simply the ordinary guilt of someone who had failed to prevent harm to a person they cared about, was the specific guilt of someone who understood that the specific method of the harm had been the specific exploitation of a specific relationship whose existence was partly the expression of the specific project, and that the specific project's specific shape had made the specific exploitation available. The specific near violation the Jason Todd aftermath produced was the nearest the rule came to violation in the context of the Joker relationship prior to the events of Arkham City. The specific quality of this near violation was distinct from the Barbara Gordon near violation in the specific dimension of the personal failure, which added to the grief a specific form of self-directed anger, whose specific combination with the other directed anger at the Joker produced the specific emotional configuration most capable of overwhelming the specific commitment. A person grieving for a harmed person they loved was a person experiencing one form of the specific emotional weight that made the rule most costly to maintain. A person grieving for a destroyed person they had been specifically responsible for, in the specific awareness that the specific responsibility's specific expression had been the specific instrument of the specific exploitation, was a person experiencing a more specifically devastating form of that weight, a form that added the specific failure to the specific grief and produced the specific combination whose specific properties the Joker's campaign had been designed to generate. The Arkham City conclusion was the specific event in the Joker relationship that most directly demonstrated the specific character of the near violation in its most philosophically complex available form, the form in which the near violation was not organized around the specific temptation to use capability against the specific person, but around the specific temptation to withhold the capability's non-application in the specific form of the cure. The Joker was dying. Batman possessed the specific means of preventing the dying. The specific choice not to administer the specific means was made in full awareness of what the choice was and what the choice would produce, and the specific moral character of the choice occupied the specific territory, the most difficult for the rule's conventional formulation, to address the territory in which the distinction between killing and allowing death was at its most specific and its most philosophically contested. The specific question the Arkham City conclusion raised about the rule was the question of whether what happened there was a near violation or something the near violation category was inadequate to describe. The conventional formulation of the rule was organized around the prohibition of the specific act of killing, of the specific application of capability to the specific production of another person's death. The Arkham City conclusion was not, this was not the specific act of killing, but the specific choice not to prevent a specific dying that was already in progress, and that the specific withholding of the specific cure was permitting to continue. Whether the rule's spirit was violated by this choice, in a sense that the rule's letter did not clearly address, was a question whose specific difficulty reflected the specific character of the Joker's campaign at its most philosophically sophisticated. The campaign's success in constructing a situation in which the rule's conventional formulation was genuinely insufficient to describe the specific moral character of the specific choice being made, in which the commitment and the violation occupied a territory that the usual categories could not cleanly divide. The Joker died understanding that something significant had been accomplished, that the specific person who had organized their existence around the specific commitment had made a specific choice in a specific moment, whose specific moral character the commitment's conventional formulation could not entirely account for, and that whatever the precise philosophical status of the choice, the Joker's thesis about the specific character of Batman's world had received its most specific and its most personal confirmation. Not the dramatic violation that the campaign had been organized around producing. Something quieter and more philosophically significant, the specific demonstration that the rule's limits existed, that the specific moral architecture whose maintenance the rule was organized around sustaining had a specific edge beyond which the specific architecture of the commitment could not extend cleanly, and that the Joker's sustained campaign to find and to demonstrate that specific edge had arrived, in the specific form of the specific dying in the specific building, with the specific cure present and the specific choice made, at its most complete single expression. Section 5. Ra's al Ghul and the temptation of necessary evil. Ra's al Ghul presented a specific challenge to the rule, whose specific character was not available from any other figure in Batman's operational landscape, and that required a specific form of engagement that the Joker's challenge had not required not simply the management of specific emotional states under specific pressures, but the specific intellectual engagement with a coherent philosophical argument whose coherence was genuine and whose specific application to the rule's adequacy was specific and sustained and not dismissible through the simple identification of the person making the argument as someone whose conclusions could be rejected on the basis of their source. The Joker's challenge to the rule was organized around the demonstration that the rule was fragile, that sufficient pressure applied in the specific forms the Joker understood most completely would eventually dissolve the specific commitment. Ra's al Ghul's challenge was organized around the demonstration that the rule was wrong, that the specific moral framework it expressed was genuinely inadequate to the specific moral demands of the specific world it was being applied within, and that the specific person maintaining it was maintaining it not from moral strength, but from the specific failure to extend the specific moral reasoning that had produced the project to its specific, logically required conclusions. The specific character of Ra's al Ghul as a figure, the specific combination of genuinely comprehensive moral framework and genuine organizational capability and genuine personal menace and genuine understanding of what the world's specific failures required as responses was the specific thing that made him the most philosophically challenging of all the figures in Batman's operational landscape. He was not a person who had abandoned moral frameworks. He was a person whose moral framework was more internally consistent in certain specific dimensions than Batman's, and whose specific conclusions about what the world's specific failures required as responses were conclusions that the specific premises he shared with Batman, the premises about the scale and the significance of the specific failures could be followed to if one were willing to follow the argument to its specific end, rather than stopping at the specific point at which Batman's commitment to the rule required the argument's termination. The specific shared premises were what made the challenge most specifically demanding. Ra's al Ghul looked at the same world. Batman looked at the same world of institutional failure and concentrated human suffering and the specific inadequacy of the conventional responses available within the conventional frameworks, and arrived at specific conclusions about what those observations required as responses. The conclusions were different from Batman's conclusions. but they derived from the same specific starting points, and the specific derivation was coherent in the specific sense that the specific reasoning connecting the premises to the specific conclusions did not contain the specific errors that the simple refusal of the conclusions could be based on. To reject Ra's al Ghul's conclusions required engaging with the specific reasoning, rather than simply identifying the conclusions as wrong, required the specific intellectual work of showing where the specific reasoning went wrong, or why the specific premises led to different specific conclusions than Ra's al Ghul derived from them, and the specific difficulty of this specific intellectual work was the specific form of the challenge's most demanding dimension. The League of Shadows training was the specific context in which the first major near violation in the Ra's al Ghul relationship occurred, and the specific character of this near violation was the character of a near violation organized not around the specific emotional weight of specific harm to specific people, but around the specific intellectual weight of a specific moral test, whose specific terms were the most philosophically demanding that the formation period had yet produced. The test was simple in its presentation and complex in its implications. Kill this specific person, the specific person designated as the test subject, a person whose specific crimes against specific other people were specific and documented, and the specific evidence for which was not in question, and demonstrate thereby the specific commitment to the specific project that the League's training was producing. Do not kill, and demonstrate thereby the specific insufficiency of the specific formation for the specific work that the specific project the League represented required. The specific near violation was not organized around the temptation of retribution or grief or rage, none of which were available in the specific context of the test, in the specific forms they took in the more personally organized near violations. It was organized around the specific temptation of philosophical coherence, the specific temptation of a person who had organized their existence around the specific project of addressing the specific failures of the specific world, and who was being offered the specific, most direct available method of addressing the specific, most egregious available expression of those failures, in the specific context of a specific organization whose specific purpose was organized around the specific, most comprehensive available approach to the specific problem. The temptation was not simply that the killing was justified in the specific terms of the specific case's specific merits. The temptation was that the killing was required by the specific logic of the specific project's specific, most complete available expression, and that the specific refusal to kill was the specific refusal of the specific and most complete available expression of the specific project in favor of a specific, less complete version, whose specific incompleteness was the specific thing, the Garda. Refusal was organized around preserving the specific form of the refusal, the specific act of choice that ended the League of Shadows training and initiated the specific independent development of the Batman project, was not organized around the simple proposition that killing was wrong. It was organized around the specific conviction that the specific project, whose specific most complete expression required killing, was not the specific project the formation was producing, was something different from it in a specific way that the rule was the specific expression of, and that the specific ending of the training was the specific moment at which the specific difference became specific and personal, and requiring the specific choice between the specific projects rather than the specific continuation of a formation that was organized around resolving the difference on the League's specific terms. The specific things this choice revealed about the rule were things that the abstract statement of the rule could not have revealed. It revealed that the rule was not simply a limit on the project's methods, but the specific definition of the project's character, the specific thing that made the Batman project the specific thing it was, rather than the League of Shadows project, whose specific methods and whose specific scope were both genuinely more comprehensive than the specific limitations the rule imposed. The choice was therefore not simply the choice to maintain a specific constraint, but the choice of a specific, less comprehensive project over a specific, more comprehensive one, organized around the specific conviction that the specific character of the less comprehensive project was the specific thing that gave it the specific value. The more comprehensive project did not have the specific value of being conducted by a specific person whose specific integrity was the specific precondition of the specific work's specific significance. The repeated encounters between Batman and Ra's al Ghul across the subsequent years were the specific occasions on which this specific foundational choice was repeatedly tested in the specific terms of the specific situations the encounters produced. The specific pattern of these encounters was the pattern of a recurring philosophical argument conducted through the specific medium of physical and tactical conflict, a sustained debate whose specific terms were the terms of the original choice between the specific projects, returned to repeatedly in the specific forms that the specific years and the specific circumstances made available. Ra's al Ghul did not simply try to defeat Batman in these encounters. He tried, through the specific structure of the specific situations he constructed, to demonstrate that the specific choice Batman had made at the League's training was the specific wrong choice, that the specific world's specific ongoing failures were the specific evidence that the specific less comprehensive project was genuinely inadequate to the specific, more comprehensive demands that the specific world's specific failures generated. The specific near violations these encounters produced were near violations of a specific philosophical quality, organized not around the specific emotional configurations of the Joker relationship, but around the specific intellectual recognition, repeated in the specific terms of each specific encounter, that Ra's al Ghul's specific argument was not simply wrong in the way that the simplest available dismissal of it would prefer. The specific argument had specific, genuine force, and the specific maintenance of the rule against the specific force of the argument required the specific ongoing engagement with the argument, rather than the specific simple rejection of it on the basis of its source. Each specific encounter was therefore not simply the specific challenge of the specific threat, but the specific challenge of the specific argument, the specific requirement to maintain the commitment against the specific weight of a command, genuine case rather than against the specific weight of a mere provocation. The specific form of Batman's sustained engagement with the Ra's al Ghul challenge was the specific form of engagement that most completely revealed the specific character of the rule as something other than simple moral certainty. The rule was not maintained against Ra's al Ghul's challenge through the specific confidence that Ra's al Ghul was simply wrong, through the specific conviction that the specific argument was invalid, in a way that the specific refutation of the specific argument demonstrated. It was maintained through the specific choice to accept the specific argument's specific, genuine force and to maintain the commitment against that force anyway, organized around the specific conviction that the specific character of the person the commitment was protecting was worth the specific cost of its protection, even against the specific weight of the specific argument's specific, genuine claim that the cost was too high. This specific form of the rule's maintenance, the maintenance of a commitment against a genuine argument rather than against a mere error, was the specific form that the Ra's al Ghul relationship most completely revealed as the specific character of what the rule actually required. Not the simple refusal of simple wrong, the sustained commitment against the genuine weight of genuine argument, renewed in each specific encounter, expressing in its specific ongoing renewal the specific conviction that the specific integrity whose maintenance the rule was organized around was the specific condition of the specific significance of the specific project whose specific methods the integrity was defining and protecting and limiting and sustaining all at once, simultaneously, through the specific, ongoing act of the specific commitment's specific maintenance. What Ra's al Ghul's specific challenge most specifically revealed about the rule, the specific dimension of the near violations, the challenge produced that was most specifically available only through this specific. The relationship was the specific revelation that the rule's maintenance was not simply a behavioral achievement, but a philosophical one. The near violations of the Joker relationship were near violations of emotional management, of the specific maintenance of commitment against the specific weight of specific grief and specific rage and specific personal loss. The near violations of the Ra's al Ghul relationship were near violations of philosophical conviction, of the specific maintenance of commitment against the specific weight of specific intellectual argument, whose specific genuine force required specific genuine engagement rather than specific simple dismissal. Both specific forms of near violation were genuine. The Ra's al Ghul form was the form whose specific demands most completely expressed the specific character of the rule as something requiring not simply the will to maintain it, but the specific intellectual and moral sophistication to maintain it against the specific, most complete, available case for its abandonment, rather than simply against the specific provocations of the person most completely organized around demonstrating its fragility. Section 6. The Rogues Gallery, Specific Encounters and Their Specific Near Violations. The Rogues Gallery was not simply a collection of colorful criminals who happened to operate in the same city as a colorful vigilante, was not the incidental accumulation of the specific individuals whose specific characteristics made them most suitable for the specific, dramatic requirements of the specific genre within which the Batman project expressed itself in the cultural imagination. It was the specific population of the specific world that the specific project had generated through the specific mechanism of its own operation, the specific people whose specific transformations and specific criminal identities were the specific products of the specific interaction between the specific cities, specific failures, and the specific presence of the specific project that had organized itself around addressing those failures. The Rogues Gallery was, in this specific sense, Batman's Rogues Gallery, in a more personal sense than the possessive typically implies, was the specific population of specific threats that the specific project had produced partly through its own specific existence, and whose specific relationship to the rule was the specific relationship of the specific threats most completely calibrated through the specific history of their specific encounters with the specific commitment to find and engage the specific limits of the specific rule's specific adequacy. Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face produced near violations whose specific character was among the most personally organized of all the Rogues Gallery, near violations organized not simply around the specific harm Two-Face had done or was capable of doing, but around the specific grief of watching the specific person who had represented the most genuine and most complete alternative to Batman's vigilantism become the specific evidence of the alternative's inadequacy. Harvey Dent had been the legitimate version of the project, the person whose specific commitment to genuine justice within the legitimate institutional framework had been the specific expression of the hope that the framework could be made adequate to the specific demands that Batman's vigilantism was organized around addressing outside of it. The acid attack and what it had produced had taken the specific person who was the specific hope for the specific legitimate alternative and had returned to Gotham's landscape, a person whose specific relationship to justice was not the relationship of the legitimate framework's most complete expression, but of its most specific, and most personally devastating refutation. The near violations that Harvey Dent's continuation as Two-Face produced in Batman were near violations organized around a specific emotional configuration that distinguished them from every other near violation in the Rogues Gallery context, a configuration that included not simply the grief for a harmed person and not simply the rage at a threatening person, but something more specifically complicated. The specific emotion of someone who was watching a friend's ruin continue rather than concluding, who was engaging in repeated specific encounters with the specific person the ruin had produced, in the awareness that the specific person the ruin had produced was simultaneously the specific friend the ruin had destroyed, and who was maintaining the specific commitment, not simply against the specific harm but against the specific temptation that the specific friend's specific ruin most specifically generated, which was the temptation not of retribution but of mercy, the specific consideration of whether the most genuinely caring, available response to this specific ruin was the specific permanent ending of it, rather than the specific, ongoing management of the ruin's consequences. The mercy dimension of the Two-Face near violations was the specific dimension that distinguished them most completely from the retributive dimensions of the Joker near violations and the philosophical dimensions of the Diamonds, Ra's al Ghul near violations. To feel the specific temptation of mercy in the specific context of an encounter with a person whose specific actions had produced specific harm was a form of moral complexity that the simple account of the rule as a prohibition against killing could not entirely capture, could not capture the specific way in which the temptation was organized, not around the desire to harm, but around the desire to help. The specific configuration of someone whose specific relationship to the specific person in front of them was the relationship of genuine love, confronting genuine ruin, and considering whether the specific, most loving, available response was the specific response the rule was prohibiting, rather than the specific response the rule was permitting. Jonathan Crane and the specific near violations his methods produced operated through a mechanism categorically different from any of the other Rogues Gallery near violations, a mechanism whose specific character was the character of induced psychological compromise rather than externally applied pressure. The fear toxin was not simply a weapon in the sense of an instrument whose application caused specific physical harm to the specific person it was applied to. It was a weapon whose specific mechanism was the specific alteration of the specific psychological states through which the specific person it was applied to experienced and processed the specific reality they were operating within. And the specific near violations it produced in Batman were near violations whose specific character was the character of a commitment being tested not through the specific pressure of external circumstances, but through the specific compromise of the specific psychological architecture through which the commitment was maintained. The specific question this raised about the near violations produced by fear toxin exposure was the specific philosophical question of what they revealed about the commitment versus what they revealed about the toxin's specific effects on the specific psychological architecture through which the commitment was normally maintained. The other near violations in the Rogues Gallery context were near violations in which the specific person was fully present in the specific awareness of the specific commitment and was finding the specific commitment costly to maintain against the specific weight of the specific circumstances, was experiencing the specific gap between the capability and the commitment, in full awareness of both the capability and the commitment, and making the specific choice that the maintenance of the commitment required. The fear toxin near violations were near violations of a different specific quality, near violations in which the specific person's full presence in the specific awareness of the specific commitment was itself being compromised by the toxin's specific effects, in which the specific psychological architecture through which the commitment was maintained was the specific target of the specific weapon whose application was producing the specific near violation. The specific near violation most directly produced by fear toxin exposure in the Arkham Asylum events was the near violation organized around the specific hallucination, the specific induced experience of the specific most feared scenario, produced by the specific neurological effects of the specific compound on the specific psychological formation that the specific years of training had produced in the specific person the specific training had formed. The specific thing the hallucination produced in Batman was not simply fear in the generic sense of the emotion, was the specific configuration of the specific psychological states that the specific formation had produced the specific vulnerability to, the specific experience of the specific most feared possibilities, made viscerally and immediately present in the specific way that the specific toxins, specific neurological effects on the specific psychological architecture were designed to produce. The near violation the hallucination generated was the near violation of someone whose specific psychological architecture for maintaining the specific commitment was being directly engaged and compromised by the specific weapon, whose application was the specific occasion for the specific near violation. The return from the toxin's specific compromise to the specific commitment's maintenance was the specific act most revealing of the specific character of the commitment in the specific context of the fear toxin. Near violations, the specific act of the specific person, reasserting the specific control over the specific compromised psychological architecture that the specific toxin had been designed to prevent. The specific quality of this reassertion was the quality of a commitment whose specific roots were sufficiently deep in the specific formation that they remained available as the specific foundation for the specific reassertion, even in the specific conditions of the specific compromise that the specific toxin had produced, and the specific availability of the specific roots under the specific conditions was the specific evidence of the specific character of the commitment as something more architecturally fundamental than the specific psychological states through which it normally expressed itself. Bane and the specific near violations his specific encounters produced operated through the most physically immediate available form of the specific challenge, the form in which the specific gap between the capability and the calming commitment was engaged not through the specific weight of grief or philosophy or induced psychological compromise, but through the specific weight of a specific body in a specific encounter, requiring the specific most direct engagement with the specific choice between killing and being killed that the project generated. Bane was the specific figure whose specific physical capability most directly engaged the specific dimension of the rule's cost that was organized around the specific bodily reality of what the commitment required in the specific encounters with specific opponents, whose specific capability was adequate to the specific killing of the specific person, maintaining the commitment if the specific methods the commitment permitted were insufficient to the specific encounter's specific demands. The specific near violations the Bane encounters produced were near violations of a specific quality whose distinction from the other Rogues Gallery near violations was the distinction of the most directly physical, organized not around the specific emotional complexity of the Two-Face relationship, or the specific philosophical weight of the Ra's al Ghul argument, or the specific induced compromise of the Scarecrow's toxin, but around the specific, simple, and overwhelming bodily reality of a specific physical confrontation in which the specific, most immediate, available resolution of the specific threat presented was the specific application of the specific capability whose application the commitment was prohibiting. The specific weight of this specific form of the near violation was the weight of the most honest available form the form stripped of the specific additional dimensions that the other near violations carried, organized simply around the specific gap between the capability and the commitment in its most directly physical and most directly forcing expression. The specific form of Batman's maintenance of the commitment in the specific Bane encounters was the specific form most revealing of the specific character of the rule, as something organized not simply around the specific choice not to kill in specific moments of decision, but around the specific development of the specific methods adequate to the specific encounters in which the specific choice would otherwise present itself in its most forcing form. The Bane encounters were the specific occasions on which the specific development of the specific tactics and the specific endurance and the specific willingness to accept the specific bodily cost of the specific methods, the commitment permitted over the specific methods it prohibited, was most directly and most physically required. The specific occasions on which the specific commitment expressed itself, not simply in the specific moment of decision, but in the specific years of preparation, whose specific purpose was the specific adequacy of the permitted methods to the specific demands the encounters produced. The encounters involving Killer Croc and Clayface and the various other figures whose specific biological natures raised the specific question of whether the rule applied in the same terms to beings whose relationship to human life and human death was different in ways the rule's original formulation had not explicitly addressed, produced near violations of a specific philosophical quality, whose distinction from the others was the distinction of the question itself, rather than simply the weight of the specific circumstances organizing the specific near violation. The rule had been formulated in the specific context of a specific understanding of what the relevant category was, the category of persons whose lives the commitment was organized around not taking, and the specific encounters with beings whose specific relationship to that category was complicated by the specific transformations that had produced them, raised the specific question of whether the rule's application in its conventional form was genuinely adequate to the specific situation. The specific way Batman navigated this specific question was the specific way most revealing of the specific character of the commitment as something organized around a specific understanding of the relevant category that the specific encounters were testing rather than confirming. The specific practical decisions of the specific encounters, the specific choices about which methods were applied, in which configurations, against which specific threats, reflected the specific extension of the categories, relevant characteristics to the specific situations in which the characteristics' presence in the specific beings was most directly relevant to the specific question of the rule's application. The specific near violations in these encounters were near violations of the specific philosophical quality of someone extending a specific category to specific cases it had not originally been formulated for, and finding the extension requiring the specific commitments, specific maintenance in the specific terms of the specific new situations, not the simple application of the original rule to obviously similar cases, but the specific work of extending the original commitment to specifically different cases through the specific recognition of the specific relevant similarities. The Victor Fry's encounters produced near violations of the specific quality most distinct from all the others. The quality of near violations organized not around retribution or grief or philosophical argument or physical necessity or induced compromise or categorical extension, but around the specific response to a specific situation whose specific character was the character of a genuinely tragic one in the most specific available sense of the word. Tragedy. Victor Fries was not a person whose specific situation admitted the simple moral categories that the simple moral framework for thinking about the specific criminals Batman encountered most typically employed. He was a person whose specific motivation was genuine and whose specific love for the specific person whose welfare organized his specific existence was genuine, and whose specific ruin had been produced by the specific interaction of that specific genuine love with the specific circumstances that the specific world had arranged around it, and the specific near violations his specific encounters produced in Batman were near violations of the specific quality of someone paying the specific quality of attention to a specific person's specific situation, that the entirety, specific quality of attention required acknowledging the specific, genuine tragedy of the situation in full. The specific temptation the Victor Freeze encounters organized was the specific temptation whose structure was most fundamentally different from the other rogues' gallery. Near violations, the specific temptation not of rage or grief or retribution or philosophical coherence or physical necessity, but of the specific response to genuine tragedy that the most honest attention to genuine tragedy produces in a person of sufficient honesty and sufficient care to pay the attention genuinely. The specific near violation was organized around the specific question of whether the specific, most genuinely caring response to the specific, tragic situation of the specific person in front of one was the specific, permanent ending of the tragedy rather than the specific continuation of the specific encounters, in which the specific tragedy expressed itself in the specific forms that the specific criminal activity the specific tragedy had produced required. Addressing the specific quality of this near violation as a near violation of compassion rather than of rage was the specific thing that distinguished it most completely. The specific evidence that the rule's specific costs were not simply the specific costs of restraining the specific impulses toward retribution and rage, but the specific costs of restraining the specific impulse toward mercy in the specific cases where the specific form of mercy the impulse was organized around was the specific mercy the rule was prohibiting. Section 7. The Inner Circle. Near violations involving those Batman protected. The specific near violations organized around the people in Batman's own circle had a specific quality that distinguished them from every other category of near violation in the documented history of the project. The fived quality of the most personal available form of the challenge, in which the specific harm or the specific threat was not to a specific stranger or a specific person in the general population of the city that the project was organized around protecting, but to a specific person whose specific relationship to Batman was itself the specific foundation of the specific dimension of the project that their specific presence in it expressed. The near violations involving Gotham at large were near violations in which the specific weight pressing on the commitment was the weight of generalized harm to generalized people, however real the generalization's specific components were. The near violations involving the inner circle were near violations in which the specific weight pressing on the commitment was the weight of specific harm to specific people whose specific relationships to Batman were the false, specific, most personal relationships available to a specific person whose specific formation had organized the specific project of protecting Gotham, partly around the specific cost of the specific personal relationships that the project required. Commissioner Gordon's specific relationship to Batman was the specific relationship that most directly organized the specific near violations in which Gordon's specific harm or Gordon's specific threat was the specific occasion for the specific near violation. The relationship was not simply professional, was not simply the specific alliance of two specific people who had identified a specific shared commitment to the specific pursuit of justice in a specific city whose specific institutional failures made the specific unusual character of the specific alliance both practically necessary and morally complicated. It was a relationship of genuine human connection between two specific people who had been shaped by the specific shared engagement with the specific, most difficult, available dimensions of the specific project, of maintaining the specific commitment to justice in the specific conditions that Gotham generated, a connection whose specific character was the character of genuine mutual recognition between two specific people who understood something about the specific world they were both operating in, that the specific world had made difficult to share with the specific people whose relationship to it was organized around maintaining the specific illusion of its manageability. The specific near violations organized around harm to Gordon or threats to Gordon's life were near violations that carried the specific additional weight of the specific awareness that Gordon's specific vulnerability was partly Batman's specific creation, that the specific choice to ally with a specific vigilante had made Gordon and Gordon's family the specific targets of the specific people for whom the specific alliance was the specific, most available instrument of the specific, most direct available attack on the specific person the specific alliance supported. The specific moral dimension this added to the specific near violation was the moral dimension of responsibility, the specific awareness that the specific person whose specific harm was the specific occasion for the specific near violation was a specific person whose specific exposure to the specific harm was partly organized around the specific relationship with Batman, and that the specific, most available response to the specific recognition of this specific responsibility was the specific commitment to prevent the specific harm from recurring through the specific, most direct available method, which was the specific elimination of the specific source. The specific form of the near violation in the Gordon context was the form most organized around the specific combination of protective rage and specific guilt, the specific configuration of someone who was responding to specific harm to a specific person they had placed in specific danger through the specific choices that had produced the specific relationship, and who was responding with the full, specific weight of the specific capability that the specific formation had produced in them. The maintenance of the rule against this specific weight required the specific form of its maintenance, most specifically organized around the specific self-awareness of the specific person maintaining it, the specific recognition that the specific, most direct available response to the specific recognition of the specific responsibility was the specific response. The specific commitment was prohibiting, and the specific choice to maintain the commitment against the specific weight of the specific responsibility, rather than permitting the specific weight of the specific responsibility to serve as the specific justification for the specific response the commitment was prohibiting. Alfred's specific relationship to the project and to the rule occupied a specific position in the inner circle, near violations that no other specific relationship could replicate the position of the specific person who had been present at the specific formation of the specific commitment, who had watched the specific person making the commitment make it across the specific years of the specific project's development, and whose specific understanding of the specific commitment's specific costs was the specific most complete understanding available to any specific person outside the specific person maintaining it. Alfred was not simply a support figure in the instrumental sense of someone whose specific contributions to the specific project were confined to the specific practical dimensions of maintaining the specific infrastructure the specific project required. Alfred was the specific human foundation of the specific project in the specific sense of being, the specific person whose specific continued presence organized, the specific, most genuinely human dimension of the specific person behind the specific project, the dimension that the specific project's specific demands were most consistently organized around consuming and that Alfred's specific continued presence was most specifically organized around sustaining the near violations organized around harm to Alfred or threats to Alfred's specific life were therefore near violations whose specific weight was the weight of the most foundational, available, personal threat, the father round Dharma, specific threat to the specific person whose specific continued presence was the specific condition of the specific humanity that the specific project was organized partly around preserving in the specific person whose specific formation for the specific project had been most comprehensively organized around the specific displacement of that specific humanity in the service of the specific capability the project required. A threat to Alfred was a threat to the specific thing that most specifically needed to survive in Bruce Wayne in order for Batman to remain Bruce Wayne in the specific sense the specific project required, and the specific near violations the threats produced reflected the specific weight of this specific dimension in the specific form of the most fundamental, available personal emergency, the emergency of the specific, most irreplaceable, specific person in the specific, most personal, available dimension of the specific project. The specific form of the near violation in the Alfred context was the form characterized by the specific quality of existential weight, the weight of the specific person who understood most completely what the rule meant, what it cost, being the specific person whose harm produced the specific near violation, which added to the near violation the specific dimension of being observed in the specific psychological sense, by the specific person who understood what was being asked of the specific commitment in the specific moment. Alfred had watched the commitment be made. Alfred had watched the commitment be maintained across the specific encounters that the early career had produced. Alfred's specific presence in the specific near violation was therefore the specific presence of someone who carried the specific history of the specific maintenance in the specific awareness that their own specific harm was the first relation, specific occasion for the specific near violation, and whose specific understanding of what the commitment was and what its maintenance required was itself part of the specific weight pressing on the specific commitment in the specific moment. The Robins and the specific near violations organized around harm to the various people who had occupied that specific role constituted a specific category of inner circle, near violation, whose specific shared quality was the quality of the specific near violation organized around the specific, most direct, available expression of the specific, most personal dimension of the specific failure dimension of the project, the specific recognition that the specific people, most directly in the specific care of the specific project, had been specifically harmed through the specific exploitation of the specific relationship with the specific project, and that the specific harm was, therefore, not simply harm to specific people the project was protecting, but harm to specific people whose specific protection was the specific, most direct, available expression of the specific project's specific, most personal commitment. The Jason Todd near violation revisited in this specific inner circle context carried the specific additional weight of the specific parental dimension, the specific weight of someone who had taken a specific child into the time, specific, most dangerous available situation and had specifically failed to protect the specific child from the specific, most comprehensive, available harm in the specific, most personally devastating possible form. The specific guilt this produced was not simply the guilt of the failed protector in the abstract sense, but the specific guilt of the specific parent figure who had made the specific choice to bring the specific child into the specific danger and had been responsible for the specific protection that the specific danger required and had failed to provide the specific protection against the specific attack that had been most specifically calibrated against the specific relationship between the specific parent figure and the specific child. This specific guilt was the specific most devastating available personal dimension of the Jason Todd near violation, and its specific interaction with the specific grief and the specific rage in the specific near violation's specific emotional configuration was the specific thing that made the Jason Todd near violation the specific most severe of all the inner circle near violations in the specific period prior to the Arkham City events. Dick Grayson and Tim Drake organized specific near violations of specific different characters from the Jason Todd near violation in the specific inner circle context. Specific near violations organized not around the specific failure of specific protection, but around the specific threat to specific continued presence of specific people whose specific continued presence organized the specific, most hopeful, available dimension of the specific project's inner circle. The specific near violations these specific people's specific harms or threats produced were near violations of the specific quality of someone responding to the specific, most directly targeted available attacks on the trees. Specific, most hopeful, available expressions of the specific projects. Specific, most personal commitment attacks on the specific people whose specific survival and specific flourishing were the specific, most direct, available evidence that the specific project was producing something other than the specific destruction of the specific people most directly associated with it. Barbara Gordon's specific situation organized a specific category of inner circle near violation, whose specific most distinctive quality was the quality of sustained near violation rather than acute near violation. The specific sustained configuration of near violation organized not around a specific acute moment of specific harm, requiring specific immediate response, but around the specific ongoing awareness of a specific ongoing situation whose specific character was the character of a specific injury done in the specific context of a specific relationship for which specific responsibility was genuinely present and whose specific ongoing existence was the specific ongoing occasion for the specific ongoing near violation. The sustained quality of the near violation in Barbara Gordon's case was the specific thing that most distinguished it from the acute near violations of the other inner circle relationships, was the specific form of the specific, most personally costly sustained engagement with the specific rules, specific, most personally sustained near violation that the inner circle context produced. The specific, most personally costly dimension of the Barbara Gordon sustained near violation was the dimension most organized around the specific awareness of what the specific ongoing situation meant for the specific ongoing life of the specific person whose specific situation it was, the specific engagement with the specific reality of the specific life that Barbara Gordon was living in, the specific aftermath of the specific harm, in the specific awareness of the specific relationship whose specific character had made the specific harm available as the specific instrument of the specific attack it had been, and the specific ongoing maintenance of the commitment against the specific weight of the specific ongoing awareness of all of this in the specific form of the specific sustained near violations specific most personally, demanding continued maintenance. Section 8. Gotham's Systemic Villains. Near violations involving institutional evil. The specific near violations organized around Gotham's institutional villains, the corrupt officials, and the organized crime structures, and the political machinery of a city whose specific institutional failures were not occasional or incidental, but structural and pervasive, had a specific quality that distinguished them from all the rogues gallery near violations and all the inner circle near violations in a specific way that required its own specific accounting. The rogues gallery near violations were organized around the specific, most dramatic, and the most individually spectacular forms of the specific challenge to the commitment forms whose specific dramatic character made them most immediately available evidence of the commitment's most extreme testing. The inner circle near violations were organized around the specific, most personally significant forms of the challenge forms, whose specific personal character made them the most immediately felt evidence of the specific costs. The commitment imposed on the most specifically personal dimensions of the specific project. The institutional villain near violations were organized around a specific, different form of the challenge, whose specific character was the character of the specific most sustained and the specific most structurally embedded form of. The harm the project was organized around addressing the form in which the specific harm was not organized around the specific spectacular individual acts of specific identifiable individuals, but around the specific systematic operation of specific institutional structures that produced specific harm at the specific scale and with the specific persistence that individual acts, however spectacular, could not approach. The specific near violations produced by encounters with corrupt police were near violations whose specific emotional configuration was among the most specifically complicated available in the project's documented history, organized around the specific combination of the rage of betrayal and the specific frustration of the specific most complete available expression of the specific institutional inadequacy that the specific project was organized, partly around addressing from outside. The corrupt police officer was not simply a criminal in the category of the criminals the project addressed, was a person who had been given the specific authority of the legitimate institutional framework and who had used that specific authority in the specific service of the specific harm the authority was supposed to prevent. The specific betrayal this represented was the specific, most complete, available, single-person expression of the specific, structural failure that organized the specific, most fundamental dimension of Batman's relationship to the failure. Specific city, whose specific institutional structure made the specific project both necessary and specifically morally complicated. The near violation the corrupt police officer produced was not simply the near violation of someone responding to a specific individual threat. It was the near violation of someone responding to the specific, most complete, available expression of the specific, most fundamental, available form of the specific disillusionment with the specific institutional framework that the specific commitment to not killing was partly organized around preserving the specific disillusionment of discovering that the specific institution, whose specific adequacy, the specific commitment, was partly organized around making more available through the specific forcing of the specific institutional framework to address the specific threats the project identified, was not simply inadequate in the specific ways that the structural analysis suggested it was. Inadequate, but was actively corrupted in the specific, most directly defeating available form, in the specific form of specific individuals, using the specific institutional authority to serve the specific harm the authority was supposed to address. The specific form of the near violation in the corrupt police context was the form organized around the specific frustration of the specific person who had organized their existence around a specific project, partly defined by the specific relationship to the specific institutional framework as the specific, legitimate alternative to the specific vigilantism that the project's necessary departure from the framework expressed the specific person for whom the specific corruption of the specific institutional alternative was not simply a specific operational problem, but a specific dimension of the specific foundational challenge to the specific integrity of the specific project's specific relationship to the specific legitimacy whose inadequacy had made the project necessary and whose continued existence the project was partly organized around preserving for the specific people the project was protecting. The specific maintenance of the commitment in this specific context required the specific form of its maintenance, most organized around the specific self-awareness of someone who understood that the specific rage, the situation was generating was the specific rage, whose specific expression in the specific most direct available form was the specific expression the commitment was most specifically prohibiting, precisely because it was the specific most directly available expression of the specific most comprehensible available response to the specific most directly enraging available form of the specific structural failure the project was organized around. Roman Sionis and the specific near violations his specific operations produced were near violations whose specific character was the character of the near violation organized around the specific most documented available form of the specific systematic cruelty, the specific organized criminal enterprise whose specific methods were not the incidental violence of conventional criminal activity, but the specific, deliberate deployment of the specific, most comprehensive available forms of suffering as the specific instrument of the specific, most comprehensive available form of organizational control. Black Mask was the specific figure in Gotham's organized crime landscape who most completely exemplified the specific form of criminal organization organized around the specific deployment of suffering as the specific organizational instrument, organized not simply around the acquisition of the specific resources and the specific territory that conventional criminal enterprise sought, but around the specific establishment of the specific most comprehensive available form of the specific fear-based control of the specific most comprehensive available population of specific people whose specific vulnerability to the specific control made them the specific most available subjects for its specific application. The specific near violations the Black Mask encounters produced were near violations whose specific character was organized around the specific most completely accumulated available form of the specific evidence for the specific most direct available justification of the specific most direct available response, the specific accumulation of the specific documented evidence of the specific systematic harm done to the specific people by the specific enterprise under the specific direction of the specific person, presented in the specific context of the specific encounter with that specific person, in which the specific capability was most directly available for the specific application, the specific commitment was most specifically prohibiting. The specific weight of the accumulation was the specific weight of the specific, most directly documented, available form of the case for the commitment's abandonment, not the philosophical coherence of Ra's al Ghul's argument or the philosophical investigation of the Joker's thesis, but the specific documentary weight of the specific harms done to the specific people, assembled into the specific case for the specific response that the specific accumulation most directly supported. The specific form of the maintenance in the Black Mask context was the form most organized around the specific character of the commitment as something maintained not against simple emotional pressure or complex philosophical argument, but against the specific weight of documented specific harm, the specific form of the maintenance of most revealing of the specific character of the commitment as something whose specific costs included the specific cost of the specific documented harms whose specific accumulation most directly and most specifically supported the specific most direct available response the commitment was prohibiting. The specific near violation was the near violation of someone who had in front of them the specific most directly documented available case for the specific action the commitment was prohibiting, and who maintained the commitment anyway, and who maintained it not through the specific simple refusal to engage with the specific case, but through the specific ongoing engagement with the specific case, in full awareness of its specific force and the farther ongoing engagement, specific maintenance of the commitment against that specific force, in full awareness of the specific cost the maintenance imposed. The political villain encounters the Rupert Thorns and the similar figures of Gotham's specific political corruption landscape, produced near violations of a specific quality organized around the specific, most structurally fundamental available form of the specific frustration of the institutional failure generated. The political villain was the specific figure whose specific form of harm was most completely protected by the specific most available institutional mechanisms, the person whose specific institutional position provided the specific most comprehensive available protection from the specific conventional criminal justice responses that the rule was partly organized around preserving as the specific legitimate alternative to the specific direct response the commitment was prohibiting. The specific near violation the political villain produced was the near violation of someone encountering the specific most complete available expression of the specific most structural available form of the specific protection of the specific harm from the specific legitimate institutional response, the specific encounter with the specific person who had organized the specific most systematic available form of the specific harm. Behind the specific most comprehensive available institutional protection from the specific consequences that the specific harm would in a functional institutional system produce. The specific form of the near violation in the political villain context was the form organized around the specific frustration of the specific most fundamental available dimension of the specific project's specific relationship to the specific legitimate institutional framework. The specific frustration of someone who had organized a specific project partly around the specific preservation of the specific legitimate institutional framework as the specific most appropriate available alternative to the specific vigilantism the project represented, encountering the specific most complete available evidence that the specific legitimate institutional framework was being organized at the specific most fundamental available structural level around the specific protection of the specific harm from the specific accountability that the specific framework claimed as its specific most foundational specific purpose. The near violation was not the near violation of simple rage, was the near violation of the specific, most specific available form of the specific structural disillusionment, the specific, most complete available expression of the specific discovery that the specific framework, the specific commitment, was partly organized around preserving, was being organized around its own specific corruption. At the specific, most fundamental, available structural level, what the institutional villain encounters collectively revealed about the rule was the specific thing that only the institutional villain encounters could reveal, the specific dimension of the rule's character as something whose specific maintenance in the face of the institutional villain's specific form of challenge required the specific form of the rule's most fundamental available engagement with its own specific, most fundamental available cost. The rogues gallery near violations were near violations of the specific, most immediate, and most emotionally present available forms of the commitment's specific challenge. The inner circle near violations were near violations of the specific, most personally significant available forms. The institutional villain near violations were near violations of the specific, most structurally fundamental available form, the form in which the specific, systematic harm was most completely protected by the specific, systematic failure of the specific, institutional framework, whose specific, adequacy of the specific commitment was partly organized around making available as the specific, most legitimate, available alternative to the specific direct response the commitment was prohibiting. To maintain the commitment against this specific form of the challenge was to maintain it in the specific form, most revealing of its specific character as something organized not simply around the specific prohibition of a specific act, but around the specific bet about the specific character of the specific person, maintaining the specific commitment and the specific institutional villain near violations were the specific occasions on which that specific bet was most specifically and most structurally required to pay the specific price of its specific maintenance. Section 9. The line in other dimensions. Near violations under extreme circumstances. The most extreme available circumstances were not simply the most extreme available versions of the circumstances that organized the more familiar categories of near violation, were not simply the Joker's campaign or the Ra's al Ghul argument or the Rogues Gallery, encounters scaled up in intensity or scope until they reached the specific level of extremity that the extreme circumstances category described. They were circumstances of a specific different character, circumstances whose specific difference from the more familiar categories was not simply a difference of scale, but a difference of kind, in which the specific frameworks through which the rule had been developed and through which its application in its conventional form had been organized were themselves being tested in ways the conventional framework had not been designed to address. The near violations the extreme circumstances produced were therefore near violations of a specific different quality from the near violations of the other categories. Near violations in which the question was not simply whether the specific commitment could be maintained against the specific weight of the specific circumstances, but whether the specific framework within which the specific commitment had been formulated was adequate to the specific demands of the specific circumstances, whether the specific rule, whose specific character had been established in the specific context of the specific project's conventional operational landscape, retained the specific adequacy to the specific demands of landscapes whose specific character was sufficiently different from the conventional one to raise the specific question of the specific adequacy of the specific conventional framework's specific application. The city-scale threat was the specific form of the extreme circumstances most directly and most simply organized around the specific, most unfavorable, available version of the specific utilitarian calculation against the rule. The scenario in which the specific harm that would be prevented by the specific single killing was not the specific harm to a specific individual or a specific group, but harm at the scale of the entire city's population, in which the specific arithmetic of lives against lives was organized not in the specific terms of specific individuals whose specific moral status could be individually assessed, but in the specific terms of the population of a specific city whose specific continued existence as a specific living population was the specific thing at stake on one specific side of the specific calculation. The specific near violation the city-scale threat produced was not simply the near violation of the specific, most extreme available form of the specific retributive or protective impulse, was the near violation of the specific, most extreme available form of the specific utilitarian argument against the rule. The argument organized around the specific arithmetic of the specific trade-off between the certainty of the one specific death and the specific probability of the many specific deaths that the one specific killing would prevent. The specific weight of the city-scale utilitarian argument against the rule was the specific, most directly measurable, available form of the weight pressing on the commitment in the extreme circumstances category, the specific form in which the costs of the commitment were expressed, not in the specific personal terms of specific relationships or specific philosophical engagements, but in the specific aggregate terms of the specific number of specific lives that the specific maintenance of the specific commitment in the specific city-scale threat scenario was placing at the specific risk of the specific harm that the specific commitment was the specific condition of. The specific near violation was the specific experience of holding the specific arithmetic in full awareness, the specific awareness of the specific capability, the specific awareness of the specific person or the specific situation that the specific application of the specific capability would address, and the specific awareness of the specific number of specific people whose specific continued existence was on the specific side of the specific calculation that the specific maintenance of the specific commitment was placing at specific risk. The specific way Batman maintained the rule against this specific form of its most extreme available testing was the specific way most revealing of the specific character of the commitment as something organized around a specific understanding of its own specific function that the specific utilitarian calculation was most completely failing to capture. The specific argument the rule's maintenance required making against the specific utilitarian argument was not the specific argument that the specific arithmetic was wrong, was not the specific claim that the calculation of lives against lives was producing the specific wrong answer, because the specific numbers were the specific wrong numbers, or the specific probabilities were the specific wrong probabilities. The specific argument was that the specific arithmetic was not the specific relevant framework, that the specific decision about whether to kill was not primarily a decision about the specific, most favorable, available aggregate outcome, but a decision about the specific character of the specific person making the decision, and the specific relationship between that specific character and the specific project. The specific person was organized around sustaining the specific conviction at the center of the commitment's maintenance against the city-scale threat was the specific conviction that the specific person who killed in the specific service of the specific prevention of the common city-scale harm was not the same specific person who could reliably address the specific next city-scale threat that the specific city of Gotham would generate, was not the specific same person, because the specific act of Gotham killing had done something specific to the specific person, making it that the specific person's specific relationship to the specific project required not to be done, had changed the specific character of the specific commitment in ways whose specific implications for the specific project were specific and significant, and not simply the specific abstract moral concerns of someone unwilling to accept the specific concrete costs of the specific concrete commitment they were maintaining. The specific integrity of the specific commitment was the specific precondition of the specific capability the integrity was protecting, and the specific person who had abandoned the integrity in the specific service of the specific arithmetic was not simply a person who had done one specific additional thing, but a specific different person whose specific different. The relationship to the specific commitment organized the specific different relationship to the specific project in ways whose specific implications were the specific most important available considerations in the specific context of the casting specific city-scale threat that the specific utilitarian argument was organized around. The supernatural and reality-altering threats produced near violations of a specific quality, organized around the specific, most complete available challenge to the specific, conventional framework's specific adequacy. The specific challenge of encounters whose specific character exceeded the specific normal framework of the specific operational landscape in the specific ways that most directly tested whether the specific, conventional application of the BRAF specific rule was genuinely adequate to the specific demands of the specific encounters the specific framework had not been designed for. The specific beings and the specific situations whose specific capabilities and specific moral status raised the specific questions most directly challenging the specific conventional application were not simply the specific most powerful. Available versions of the specific conventional threats were specific, different kinds of specific challenges in the specific ways that the specific questions they raised were specific different kinds of specific questions from the past. Specific questions. The conventional framework was most directly organized around addressing the specific near violations these encounters produced were near violations of the specific quality most organized around the specific, most fundamental, available philosophical challenge to the rule's specific application. The challenge not of the specific weight pressing on the specific commitment from the specific outside, but of the specific question pressing on the specific framework from the specific inside. The question of whether the specific rule, whose specific application was the specific expression of the specific commitment, was genuinely adequate to the specific situations, whose specific character was most completely different from the POW. Specific situations, the specific rule had been developed in the specific context of the specific maintenance of the commitment in the specific context of the supernatural and reality-altering threats was therefore the specific maintenance most revealing of the specific character of the commitment as something organized not simply around the specific prohibition of a specific act in the specific conventional operational context, but around the specific underlying principles whose specific expression in the specific conventional context was the specific rule and whose specific application in the specific different contexts was the specific most challenging available form of the specific commitment's specific extension beyond the specific conventional framework. The specific question the supernatural threats most directly raised was the question of what the specific rule was protecting when the specific beings in question were beings whose specific relationship to the specific relevant categories of the specific rules, specific formulation was complicated by the specific differences between their specific nature and the specific nature of the specific beings. The specific rule had been formulated in the specific context of the specific maintenance of the commitment in these specific contexts was the specific maintenance most organized around the specific extension of the specific underlying principles beyond the specific conventional formulation. Specific act of identifying the specific relevant characteristics in the specific situations and extending the specific commitments, specific protection to the specific beings in whom those specific characteristics were specifically present, regardless of the specific differences between those specific beings and the specific beings. The specific rule had been most directly and most conventionally formulated to protect the contingency files, the specific preparations Batman made for the specific worst-case scenarios in which the specific people in his specific most trusted circle became specific threats, requiring the specific most extreme available responses produced near violations of the specific, most philosophically distinctive quality available in the extreme circumstances category. The quality of near violations that existed in the specific preparation itself, rather than in any specific acute moment of specific decision. The specific near violation embedded in the contingency files was not the specific near violation of a specific moment of specific rage, or specific grief, or specific philosophical engagement, or specific city-scale arithmetic, was the specific near violation of the specific sustained acknowledgement, maintained across the specific extended duration of the specific preparation's specific existence, that the specific capability was being specifically prepared for the specific application, that the specific commitment was specifically prohibiting in the specific conventional operational context. The specific moral character of the specific contingency files was the specific moral character most difficult to address through the specific conventional formulation of the rule, the specific character of a specific preparation, whose specific existence was the specific most direct available evidence that the specific commitment was not organized around the specific simple impossibility of the specific act the specific commitment was prohibiting, but around the specific choice not to perform the specific act in the specific conventional operational context. A choice whose specific character as a choice rather than as a simple incapacity was most specifically demonstrated by the specific existence of the specific preparations for the specific conditions in which the specific choice would be made differently. The specific preparation was the specific, most direct available demonstration of the specific character of the commitment as a commitment rather than simply as a constraint, the specific evidence that the specific person making the specific commitment was making it in the specific, full awareness of the specific capability and the specific acknowledgement that the specific capability could be deployed in the specific most extreme available circumstances, even if the specific commitment was organized around not deploying it in the specific conventional ones. What the specific contingency files most specifically revealed about the specific rule was, therefore, the specific thing most specifically uncomfortable for the specific most comfortable available account of the specific rule, the specific revelation that the specific commitment was not organized around the specific impossibility of the specific act, but around the specific choice not to perform it. A choice whose specific character as a specific choice was most specifically demonstrated by the specific existence of the specific preparations, whose specific existence was the specific, most direct available evidence of the preparations, specific acknowledgement of the specific capability, whose specific application, the specific commitment, was specifically prohibiting in the specific conventional operational context, while specifically preparing for in the specific most extreme available exceptional one. Section 10. The specific moments, the most documented near violations. The most specifically documented individual near violations, the specific moments whose specific documentation in the available canonical record provides the most direct available evidence of what the near violation actually was in its most specific and most personally immediate available form, were not simply the specific, most dramatic available instances of the specific challenge to the commitment. They were the specific moments in which the gap between the capability and the commitment was most specifically and most precisely legible in the specific terms that the specific documentation makes available. The specific moments in which the specific combination of specific circumstances and specific awareness and specific choice was recorded with sufficient specificity to make the specific character of the near violation available to the specific quality of attention that the honest accounting requires. The specific moment in which Batman had the Joker in his specific hands in the specific aftermath of the specific events, most directly following the specific revelation of what had been done to Jason Todd, was the specific moment whose specific documentation most directly and most precisely expressed the specific character of the near violation in its most acute and most personally immediate available form. The specific circumstances were the specific circumstances, most completely organized around the specific configuration of pressures that the Joker's sustained campaign had been most specifically designed to produce. The specific grief for the specific most personally significant available loss, the specific rage at the specific person most directly responsible for the specific most personally significant available loss, and the specific physical reality of the specific most directly available access to the specific person most directly responsible in the specific context in which the specific capability was most directly available for the specific application. The commitment was most specifically prohibiting. The specific quality of the specific moment was not the quality of the specific, hot, overwhelming rage that the specific, most comfortable, available account of the near violation would prefer, was not the specific quality of an emotion so overwhelming that the specific, deliberate choice available to the specific person experiencing it was temporarily suspended by the specific weight of the emotion's specific force. The specific quality was colder than that, and the specific coldness was the specific, most disturbing, available dimension of the specific moment's specific character, the specific quality of someone who was fully present in the full awareness of the full specific situation, fully aware of the specific capability, fully aware of the specific person in front of them, and the specific things that specific person had done, and the specific most personal available dimension of those specific things, and who was conducting, in full specific awareness of all of this simultaneously. The specific deliberation, whose specific outcome was the specific most important available decision of the specific most important available moment in the specific relationship, whose specific most important available dimension was precisely this specific decision. The specific physical quality of the specific moment, as documented in the specific available record, was the specific quality of someone who had applied the specific physical capability to the specific situation to the specific degree that brought the specific person in front of them to the specific physical vulnerability that the specific further application of the specific capability would most directly and most completely exploit, who had the Joker, in the specific, most literal, available, physical sense, in his hands, with the specific, most direct available access to the specific, most directly available physical termination of the specific threat in the specific form that the specific hands, specific application to the specific physical vulnerability made available. The specific near violation was the specific experience of being in this specific physical situation in the full specific awareness of what it was and what it made available, and what the specific maintenance of the specific commitment in the specific context required, and the specific experience of making the specific choice, whose specific making was the specific, most direct available expression of the specific character of the commitment in its most personally acute and most specifically documented available form. The specific aftermath of the specific moment, the specific quality of the specific relationship between Batman and the Joker in the specific subsequent encounters, following the specific most acute near violation of the specific relationships, specific documented history, was the specific most direct available evidence of what the specific moment had done to the specific person who had made the specific choice in it. The specific choice had been made, the specific maintenance had been accomplished, the specific rule had survived the specific, most acute, available testing of the specific, most sustained available campaign against it in its specific, most personally intimate, available form. And the specific person who had made the specific choice had survived it in the specific way that the specific most difficult available choices are survived, not unchanged, not without the specific marks of the specific experience, of the specific moments, specific weight, but intact in the specific, most important, available sense of the specific commitment, remaining specifically his, and specifically present in the specific way, the specific project most specifically required it to be, the anti-life equation, and the specific choice to use the specific God-killing bullet against Darkseid constituted the specific moment in the documented history of the project in which the most absolute version of the rule was most specifically and most literally crossed in the specific act of the specific killing rather than simply approached in the specific near violation of the specific almost killing. The specific character of this specific moment in the specific context of the accounting of near violations required the specific, most careful, available engagement with the specific question of what the specific moment was. Whether it was the specific violation of the specific rule in the specific, most unambiguous available terms, or whether the specific circumstances were sufficiently different from the specific circumstances the specific rule was organized to govern that the specific act was not the same specific kind of act. The specific rule was most specifically prohibiting. The specific circumstances were the specific circumstances whose specific character was most specifically and most completely different from the specific conventional operational context within which the specific rule had been formulated and maintained. The specific being against whom the specific capability was applied was not a specific person in the specific conventional sense of the specific persons in the specific conventional operational context, whose specific lives, the specific rule, was most specifically organized around not taking, was a being whose specific relationship to the specific relevant categories was the specific relationship most specifically and most completely different from the specific conventional ones, whose specific capabilities and specific moral status were both the specific, most completely different available from the specific persons. The specific rule had been developed in the specific context of protecting. The specific harm the specific act was preventing was the specific harm at the specific most comprehensive, available scale. The specific harm not to a specific city or a specific population, but to the specific most comprehensive, available scope of the specific most fundamental available human freedom. The specific scale of the specific anti-life equation's specific application, making the specific harm the specific most comprehensively devastating, available form of the specific harm. The specific project was organized around preventing the specific aftermath of the specific Darkseid moment and its specific implications for the specific subsequent relationship between Batman and the specific rule were the specific, most directly available evidence of the specific question's specific, most honest, available answer, which was that the specific moment occupied the specific, most philosophically contested available territory, the specific territory in which the specific, most honest, available assessment was not the specific, simple confirmation of the specific rule's specific, simple violation, but the specific acknowledgement that the specific moment was the specific, most directly available evidence of the specific character of the specific rule as something organized around the specific persons and the specific harms of the specific conventional operational context, and that the specific extension of the specific rule to the specific most unconventional available circumstances required the specific most careful available engagement with the specific question of what the specific underlying principles were that the specific conventional formulation was expressing, and how those specific underlying principles applied in the specific circumstances whose specific character was most completely and most specifically different from the specific conventional context. The Arkham Knight events constituted the specific, most sustained, single available, near violation in the documented history of the project, not the specific, most acute, available, single moment of the specific commitment's specific testing, but the specific, most sustained, available, single period of the specific commitment's specific, continuous testing across the specific duration of the specific night in which the specific events occurred. The specific sustained quality of the Arkham Knight near violation was the specific quality most distinguishing it from the specific acute near violations of the specific other, most documented specific moments was the specific quality of the specific commitment being required not to survive a specific acute moment of specific overwhelming pressure, but to sustain itself across the specific duration of the specific continuous pressure, whose specific character was the character of the specific most comprehensive, available, simultaneous engagement of the specific most personally significant available dimensions of the specific challenge. The hallucinatory Joker was the specific, most significant of the specific Arkham Knight near violations, specific, multiple, simultaneous dimensions. The specific dimension organized around the specific, most complete, available expression of the specific Joker relationships of specific sustained campaign against the specific rule in the specific form, most specifically available in the specific aftermath of the specific death of the specific death, specific biological Joker. The specific hallucinatory Joker was not simply a specific symptom of the specific biological infections, specific neurological effects. It was the specific, most complete, available expression of the specific internal presence of the specific challenge to the specific commitment in the specific form that the specific internal presence made most specifically available, which was the form of the specific Joker's specific argument, being made not from the specific outside of the specific psychological architecture through which the specific commitment was maintained, but from the specific inside of the specific psychological architecture itself. The specific infected inmates were the specific additional dimension of the specific Arkham Knight sustained near violation, organized around the specific, most concrete available expression of the specific question. Specific Joker infection raised the specific question of what the specific rule required in the specific context of the specific people whose specific transformation had produced in them the specific versions of the specific challenge, whose specific most personal available form was the specific hallucinatory Joker. The specific infected inmates were the specific most directly available form of the specific evidence that the specific infection was not simply a specific individual pathology, but a specific communicable one, and the specific encounters with the specific infected inmates were the specific encounters most directly organized around the specific question of what the specific rule required of the specific person, maintaining it in the specific context of the specific challenge presented by the specific people the specific infection had produced. The specific revelation of the Arkham Knight's specific identity organized the specific, most personally devastating, available single moment within the specific, overall sustained near violation of the specific Arkham Knight events. The specific moment in which the specific person behind the specific specific armor was revealed to be the specific person, whose specific history was the most specific available expression of the specific most personally significant dimension of the specific failure dimension of the specific project. The specific near violation, the specific revelation produced, was the specific near violation most completely organized around the specific simultaneous presence of the specific most significant available personal dimensions. The specific challenge, the specific grief, the specific guilt, the specific rage, the specific awareness of the specific capability, and the specific person whose specific history was the specific evidence of the specific project's specific most personal available failure, all of them present simultaneously in the specific context of the specific most sustained available near violations, specific most personally acute available single moment. The specific resolution of the specific Arkham Knight events, specific sustained near violation, was the specific resolution most specifically revealing of the specific character of the commitment in its specific most comprehensive available single test, not simply the survival of the specific commitment through the specific most acute available single moment, but the specific survival of the specific commitment through the specific most sustained available period of the specific most comprehensive available simultaneous engagement of the specific most significant available multiple dimensions of the specific challenge. The specific survival was not the specific simple triumph of the specific willpower over the specific pressure, was the specific most completely available single expression of the specific character of the commitment as something organized at the level of the specific identity rather than simply at the level of the specific behavior, something whose specific maintenance through the specific most comprehensively challenging available single period of its specific testing was the specific most complete available evidence of the specific depth at which the specific commitment was organized in the specific person whose specific existence, the specific commitment, was the specific most fundamental available expression of. Section 11. What the near violations reveal, the rule's true character. The full accounting of the near violations assembled across the specific duration and the specific breadth of the specific documented history, organized by the specific categories whose specific characters most completely revealed the specific different dimensions of the specific challenge they represented, did not produce a simple conclusion. This specific absence of a simple conclusion was not the absence of honest conclusions available from the specific evidence, but the specific evidence of the specific character of the subject matter, whose specific honest engagement required the specific acknowledgement that the specific most important available truths about the specific rule and the specific person maintaining it were truths whose specific honest expression required. The specific complexity that the honest accounting produced, rather than the specific simplification that the most comfortable, available account would prefer to substitute for it. The specific things the full accounting of the near violations proved about the rule were specific things whose specific, honest expression required, holding the specific, most important, available, apparent contradictions simultaneously, rather than resolving the specific apparent contradictions in either of the specific simple directions that would have made the honest expression available as a simple conclusion. The rule was costly. The rule was maintained. The rule was tested to the specific limits of the specific commitment's specific capacity to maintain it. The rule was maintained past those specific limits. Each of these specific things was specifically and genuinely true, and the specific, honest expression of what the full accounting proved required acknowledging the specific simultaneous truth of all of them. rather than selecting the specific subset whose specific selection would have produced the specific, most comfortable, available, simple conclusion. The specific maintenance of the rule across the specific span and the specific severity of the specific near violations documented was the specific, most important, available fact about the rule that the full accounting produced. The specific fact whose specific significance was not the specific significance of the specific simple triumph of the specific simple principle over the specific simple pressure, but the specific significance of the specific maintenance of the specific commitment through the specific, most comprehensive, available, single body of evidence for what the specific commitments, specific maintenance against the specific, most severe, available form of the specific challenge actually required. The rule was not simply a thing Batman believed. It was a thing Batman was doing, continuously and specifically, and at the specific ongoing cost of the specific ongoing engagement with the specific ongoing weight of the specific ongoing near violations that the specific ongoing project generated. And the specific ongoing doing was the specific, most honest, available expression of the specific character of the specific commitment as a genuine commitment rather than as a simple constraint. The specific things the near violations proved about what the rule was not were the specific, most directly available evidence for the specific, honest understanding of the specific rule's specific character, specific evidence that the rule was not the simple expression of a simple person's simple certainty about a simple moral principle, whose simple application required only the simple maintenance of a simple behavioral constraint. The rule was not maintained by a person who had no genuine capacity for the act it was prohibiting. The specific person who maintained the rule across the specific near violations was a person who had been trained in the specific techniques and who possessed the specific capability and who was maintaining the specific commitment against the specific genuine weight of the specific temptation that the specific capability in the specific context of the specific circumstances produced. The specific maintenance against the specific genuine temptation was the specific most honest available expression of the specific character of the commitment as something genuine rather than something trivial. The specific things the near violations revealed about Batman as the specific person whose commitment they were testing were the specific, most directly personal available evidence from the full accounting, the specific evidence that required the specific most honest available engagement with the specific most uncomfortable available dimensions of what the full accounting produced in the specific terms of the specific understanding of the specific person. It was about the specific person whose commitment the near violations were testing was a person who could kill and chose not to. This specific fact was the specific most foundational available fact about the specific person that the full accounting made available, and its specific importance was not the importance of a simple moral judgment, but the specific importance of the specific evidence it provided about the specific relationship between the specific capability and the specific commitment in the specific person in whom both were most completely simultaneously present. The specific combination of genuine capability and genuine restraint was the specific thing about the specific person that the full accounting most specifically and most honestly revealed. The specific combination whose specific character was the character of someone for whom the rule was not the simple expression of a simple incapacity, but the specific ongoing expression of a specific ongoing choice, made in specific, full awareness of the specific capability and the specific specific costs of the specific choices, specific maintenance, and the specific reasons the specific choice was worth the specific costs in. The specific terms of the specific project whose specific character was the specific expression of the specific choice. The specific moral seriousness this specific combination expressed was not the moral seriousness of someone who found the rule easy, was the specific moral seriousness of someone who found the rule specifically costly and maintained it specifically anyway, and whose specific maintenance of the specifically costly specific rule was the specific, most directly available evidence of the specific character of the specific moral seriousness, the specific maintenance expressed. The Joker's thesis, revisited through the full accounting of the near violations, produced the specific, most comprehensive, available, single engagement with the specific question of what the near violations provided as evidence, for or against the specific thesis's specific claims. The Joker's thesis was that the rule was a construction, that the specific moral architecture through which Batman maintained the specific distinction between himself and the criminals he was fighting was a construction, maintained by will and convention rather than supported by any deeper structure, and that sufficient pressure applied in the specific ways the Joker understood most completely would eventually reveal the construction as the specific contingent thing it was, rather than the specific principled commitment it presented itself as being. The near violations were the specific body of evidence most directly available for assessing the specific thesis's specific claims, the specific occasions on which the specific pressure had been applied in the specific forms the thesis required, and the specific outcome of the specific application had been the most direct available evidence about whether the thesis's specific prediction was specifically confirmed or specifically denied. The specific evidence the near violations provided was evidence that pointed in the specific two directions. The specific honest accounting of the specific evidence required acknowledging simultaneously. The near violations confirmed the specific dimension of the Joker's thesis, organized around the specific claim that the specific rule was not a simple expression of a simple incapacity, was not the simple behavioral expression of a person who lacked the specific capability to perform the specific act the specific rule was prohibiting. The near violations were the specific evidence that the specific capability was present and that the specific pressure was genuinely felt, and that the specific commitment was maintaining the specific distinction, not through the specific, simple impossibility of its violation, but through the specific, ongoing choice of the specific person whose specific commitment it was. The Joker was correct that the specific rule was a construction in the specific sense, that the specific construction required specific ongoing maintenance rather than being the specific automatic expression of the specific person's specific nature. The specific dimension of the Joker's thesis, the near violations, most completely failed to confirm was the specific dimension organized around the specific claim that the specific construction was fragile, that the specific ongoing maintenance would eventually fail under sufficient pressure, that the specific commitment would eventually be shown to be the specific contingent thing. The specific thesis claimed, rather than the specific, genuine commitment. The specific person maintaining it was claiming it to be. The rule survived the near violations, not simply survived in the specific sense that it was technically not violated across the specific span of the specific documented history, survived in the specific deeper sense that the specific commitment was genuinely present and genuinely operative in the specific person, maintaining it across the specific full span of the specific documented near violations. was not simply the specific behavioral expression of the specific absence of the specific most extreme available form of the specific pressure, but the specific genuine commitment, present and maintained, expressed through the specific ongoing choosing across the specific full span of the specific documented testing. What remained unresolved at the conclusion of the full accounting was the specific set of questions whose specific honest engagement required the specific acknowledgement that the full accounting had not resolved them, the specific questions whose specific continued openness was the specific most honest available expression of the specific character of the subject matter, as something whose specific most honest engagement produced specific open questions, rather than specific closed conclusions. The specific question of the rule's ultimate adequacy to the specific challenges of the specific Gotham context was not resolved by the near violations, was the specific most fundamental available question that the projective near violations raised without the specific answer the near violations provided as evidence for. The specific people harmed by the specific persons whose specific continued existence was the specific condition of the specific harms were specifically and genuinely harmed, and the specific calculation of those specific harms against the specific life that would have been taken by the specific most direct available response was the specific calculation that the near violations documented without resolving. The specific question of what the specific cumulative weight of the specific near violations did to the specific person who maintained the commitment through all of them was the specific question the full accounting raised most. Specifically and most personally, the specific question whose specific honest engagement required the specific acknowledgement that the specific maintenance of the specific commitment through the specific full span of the specific near violations was not simply an achievement in the specific sense of a specific thing accomplished without cost, but an achievement in the specific sense of a specific thing accomplished at a specific cost, whose specific accumulation across the specific full span of the specific documented near violations was the specific most directly personal available evidence of what the specific project required of the specific person who had organized their specific existence around it. The rule survived. The person who maintained it across the specific near violations was changed by the specific experience of the specific near violations, specific maintenance in the specific ways that the specific experience of making the specific choice repeatedly at the specific cost, the specific choices imposed would change the specific person, making them changed in the specific ways that the honest accounting of the near violations required acknowledging, because the acknowledgement was the specific, most honest, available expression of what the specific commitment actually was, and what the specific maintenance of it against the specific near violations actually required. The accounting is finished now, and the long and specific engagement with the specific near violations across the specific span of the specific documented history has assembled what the specific honest attention to the specific subject could assemble. Specific record of a specific commitments, specific most severe testing across the specific most comprehensive, available single body of evidence for what the specific commitments, specific maintenance against the specific most severe available forms of the specific challenge actually required of the specific person whose specific commitment it was. Let it settle now, in the specific quiet of this specific night, with the specific weight that the specific honest accounting of the specific most uncomfortable available dimensions of the specific most famous commitment in the specific most documented history of the specific American hero mythology earns in the specific form of the specific honest attention of the specific subject requires for the specific honest accounting to have been worth the specific time the specific attention took. What the full accounting most honestly reveals is not the simple story that the most comfortable available accounts of the one rule prefer to tell, not the story of a specific heroic commitment maintained through the specific simple force of the specific simple conviction of the specific simple person who made it, whose specific simple certainty about the specific simple principle, whose specific simple expression, the specific simple rule, was never required to survive the specific tests that would have revealed the specific simple certainty as the specific simple performance of something more complicated, rather than the specific simple expression of something genuinely held. The specific, most honest story the full accounting tells is the specific more complicated and the specific more personally costly story of the specific commitment made by the specific person who possessed the specific capability. The specific commitment was most specifically organized around not deploying, and who maintained the specific commitment through the specific collection of the specific most severe available tests of it, not through the specific simple force of the specific simple certainty, but through the specific ongoing act of the specific choosing, repeated and specific and costly and real in the specific most personally immediate available terms, renewed in each specific near violation by the specific choice to find the specific commitment sufficient against the specific weight of the specific circumstances, rather than the specific capability more immediately available. The specific near violations were the specific evidence of the specific costs. They were not the specific evidence that the specific commitment was fragile. In the specific sense, the specific joker's specific thesis required the specific evidence of fragility to confirm were not the specific evidence that the specific construction would eventually dissolve under the specific most extreme available form of the specific pressure. They were the specific evidence of something more honest and more specific than fragility. The specific evidence of the specific character of a specific genuine commitment as something whose specific maintenance required the specific ongoing expenditure of the specific most genuinely costly available form of the specific will, in the specific most personally immediate available terms, renewed through the specific most difficult available choices, rather than simply maintained through the specific most comfortable available absence of the specific most difficult available temptation. Gotham is still there. The specific city whose specific landscape, the specific commitment, has been protecting across the specific span of the specific near violations documented in the full accounting, the specific streets and the specific rooftops, and the specific alleys where the specific most foundational available single event of the specific commitment's specific history occurred, and from which the specific commitment's specific most fundamental available personal dimension derived the specific most personal available form of its specific weight is still there in the specific quiet of the hours before the specific dawn, that the specific long night of the specific. Honest accounting has been approaching across the specific, full span of its specific engagement. The specific city is still there, and the specific commitment is still there, and the specific person whose specific commitment it is still there. In the specific, most important available sense of the specific still being. What the specific project requires, still maintaining the specific commitment through the specific ongoing choosing that the specific projects, specific ongoing demands generate, still paying the specific cost of the specific maintenance in the specific terms of the specific near violations that the specific ongoing engagement with the specific ongoing demands continues to produce. The specific question the full accounting most specifically invites is not the specific question of whether the specific commitment was right. It was not the specific most comfortable available moral judgment organized around the specific simple confirmation or the specific simple refutation of the specific moral principle, whose specific most famous expression, the specific rule was. The specific question the full accounting most specifically invites is the specific question of what the specific maintenance of the specific commitment through the specific full span of the specific near violations most specifically reveals about the specific nature of a genuine commitment as something whose specific character is the specific character of the specific ongoing choosing rather than the specific character of the specific simple having decided, and what the specific most honest available understanding of the specific nature of the specific genuine commitment most specifically reveals about the specific nature of the specific most fundamental available form of the specific moral seriousness as something that is not performed but paid in the specific most personally immediate available terms of the specific choices made in the specific moments, whose specific weight the specific full accounting has most specifically and most honestly engaged. Rest now. The specific long night of the specific honest accounting has done the specific work, the specific honest accounting of the specific subject required. The specific weight of the specific near violations and the specific commitment that survived them is the specific weight that the specific most comfortable available night's sleep most specifically and most honestly earns. Gotham endures. The commitment endures. The person maintaining it endures in the specific most important available sense, changed by the specific experience of the specific maintaining, marked by the specific cost of the specific choosing, but present and specific and genuinely his in the specific way, and the specific project most specifically and most personally requires. Sleep.